turning addictions into fuel. And yeah, I'm super grateful, Ellie, that you're back. So for any of you who have not been here when we did the first episode with Ellie, Ellie is a sensual empowerment coach, very much in the world of BDSM, kink education, being a spiritually and energetic led dominatrix, and working a lot with women exploring their sensuality and sexuality. And what I feel really also touched me when we spoke the last time was this piece when you said like you're really grateful for your addictions, and ultimately I'm grateful for basically the challenge that life sort of brings into your path. And yeah, it really touched me a lot because I feel very much resonant with what you had said there. And so that's why we're back here today, actually exploring how addictions can be this amazing fuel for growth. And also, I feel I want to use this hour to kind of debunk some myths and let's get rid of all the shame that's so often tied to addictions that ultimately just, compresses more and more energy rather than actually allowing to step into it and releasing and being free.
I am always 1,000,000% on board to get rid and release of any shame. Nobody needs that low vibration feeling. We need to just, especially around stuff like this. So and thank you for having me again. Very nice to be back.
Yeah, maybe to get into this, if you want to speak a little bit about your personal journey of realizing your addictions and then growing through them. Now being at the point where you're, man, I'm grateful that I had these hardships.
Yeah, wow. Certainly never thought that I would be saying that a few years ago. Without repeating exactly what I said the last time, I'm going to try and not make this a 3-hour long story because the journey was quite long, and there was a lot that happened. But really, in hindsight, when I look back at my life from an early age, from often like even 11 and 12, I was trying to find ways to escape accepting life the way it was, to escape being in my body, to escape being conscious of what was actually happening around me, to numb, to run away, to hide, to escape. And I think that this can be different things in different people, and this idea of addiction is everyone is addicted to something. We're all actually addicted to many things. It's just whether something is socially acceptable or whether it's not, or whether something is actually so damaging, like alcohol, drugs, gambling. But everything is damaging, but some stuff is like so more obviously damaging financially or physically that it actually becomes something that has to be focused on. So from a young age, I discovered alcohol and drugs and sex in a way that now when I look back was in a very addictive behavior. I chased highs, this which I now understand was me seeking something more than what I was feeling in my existence, because I felt like life as it was just not satisfying enough, and it wasn't enough, or it was too much. So it was this kind of contradiction of like, I either sought these addictions through boredom or through overwhelm of emotions, which seems like a strange combination, but again is a very common path for people. And when I was around about 18, I was working in a pub and I discovered the fruit machines, and I had quite severe anxiety at the time. And I mean, overthinking has always been part of my brain makeup, and I used to find it suffocating. It was like just constant noise all day long, and anything that would shut it off was like the most wonderful escape for me. So when I discovered gambling, it was like this space of like, oh, when I do this, I don't think about anything else. And interestingly, now looking back, what I actually in a way was seeking was being present, was being embodied, was being in my body in the moment. And that was the closest thing I think I'd probably found, even though it was actually very toxic and destructive in its makeup. it turned off all of this noise and all of these thoughts and all of this fear for the time that I was doing it. Now, of course, unfortunately, outside of the time I was doing it, it brought destruction and stress and depression and everything, because I don't really like to tell war stories, we call them, in the program, but you know, I could gamble my entire month's earnings in half an hour easily. Oh, and you know, and then I'd spend that next month lying to everybody around me, trying to find ways to pretend that I had enough money to pay for everything. So it was constant anxiety for, I mean, I was in action for on and off for 15 years. And it really took a kind of tipping point when in my 20s I had an accident with some oil, and I couldn't walk for several weeks after. I was bandaged and stuck at home, and I was in an abusive relationship at the time, and my partner would just go out and leave me, and then the abuse continued while this was happening. And the combination of my emotional state and my environment of being trapped, and then I discovered online gambling, and it was like all of these things, and I just went into the darkest hole with it, and it became this completely overwhelming addiction that I could not control in any way whatsoever. And I kind of came out about it a couple of times over a few years to my family and to people close to me, generally when I reached a point where I actually couldn't financially go any further. And I actually didn't know what I was going to do, and I thought I would lose my home, or I would lose my job. And I remember feeling this incredible amount of guilt and shame, and such an extra layer of shame as well, being a woman. This idea in my head that like women don't gamble. This is a man's thing to do. You should know better. And all these stories in my head of like, you're an intelligent woman. You've had a good upbringing. You haven't had any major trauma. You have no reason to be doing this. Like, you should feel even more guilty for this behavior because of the fact that you had a nice childhood with clothes and food and all of these things. But each time I was kind of doing this, when I was coming out and telling my parents and telling these things, the debts were being paid and I was going back out there, but nothing was changing on an energetic level. Nothing was changing on a spiritual level. Nothing was changing within me. It was just words that I was saying. And there was a small desire to stop because I didn't want the pain anymore. But I still didn't understand the why. And eventually I moved to London 5 years ago, and I joined a recovery program, Gamblers Anonymous, which is the same concept as AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. It uses a 12-step program, which is basically a spiritual awakening. It's a spiritual program. It is based around the idea of understanding the concept of a power that is greater than ourselves. It is not a religious program, which is something that I struggled with in the beginning, but I could talk about that whole section for like another thing. But I think it's important that people know that these programs are not religious-based programs, because it is something that would have put me off, essentially, because I had a bad relationship with religion. And I began the program, and it took me a year for me to actually hear what was being said. I showed up in the rooms, I listened to it, I went, okay, yeah. I walked away. And then every few months I went back to it again, because again, nothing was changing internally. Nothing. I couldn't get this concept of the fact that like the gambling wasn't the thing, the addiction wasn't the thing. This was an emotional disease. This was to do with my energetics, my spirituality, and my emotions. And then I think I just listened enough and for long enough and heard enough stories that the penny just dropped. And I realized that like I had to do the work internally in order for me to fix this external problem. So I began the program properly, and you do a full inventory of your entire life, of all your resentments, all your fears, all your anger, everything that you've held across the past. You work on your personal characteristics. There's a lot of releasing of shame and releasing of guilt and releasing of fear, and a invitation to a spiritual way of life and an embodied way of life. And I remember hearing this phrase, which just makes so much sense to me. And this is what really made me understand the power of recovery. Therefore, in my opinion, the power of addictions is that the worst thing about being in recovery, the best thing about being in recovery is getting your feelings back. But the worst thing about being in recovery is getting your feelings back. Because I realized the first time I sat down and I was talking to my sponsor in the morning, and I said, I'm feeling this today and I want to go and do this, because you stop the gambling or you stop the alcohol or you stop the other thing, but then I just replaced it with something else, cigarettes or sex or clubbing or something. And she said, okay, I want you to go, and I just want you to sit in your room. I just want you to sit in your body, and I want you to sit with that feeling. Sit with that feeling of anxiety. And I thought, are you mental? I'm not sitting with a feeling of anxiety. I can't think of anything more terrifying than actually allowing this feeling to just sit in my body. That was such a pivotal point for me, because I realized not only that I could do it. I mean, it was terrifying and it felt horrible. But at the other side of it, I was like, oh, I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. Actually, my body is so much more capable than I realized it was. And I realized in that point that we're never taught how to manage or process or sit with our emotions. It's not something that we're taught. It's not something that we learn in any way. I didn't learn it from culturally, socially, from nurture, from school, from anywhere. And that was the biggest kind of turning point, because a lot of the time the gambling and the addiction was there because I didn't want to sit with those emotions. And equally with the problem of the boredom, which I would say boredom in inverted commas now, came with learning to meditate again, which was part of the program. And again, when I first started doing it, it was utterly impossible for me to just sit still for more than 10 seconds. And I still learned that still is a problem, slight problem for me, but I now meditate in different ways because I know now that you can move and you don't have to be stagnant, etc. But once I actually allowed myself to sit with myself, and through practices like gratitude and through practices like service to others, like taking yourself out of your ego, removing, the program basically beats down your ego. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can feel these feelings of joy and the highs that I was seeking through my own body, through my own life, without having to do these things, if I allow it, if I'm brave enough to be able to embrace it. And I had this moment that I always talk about, which was like this really ridiculous, like I felt like which Disney film is it? It's like Sleeping Beauty, where she goes out and all the animals like land on her and she's like singing in the forest. And I was like walking out of my house, and I must have been about 3 or 4 months into the program. When I say that I could not remember a day in 20 years that I didn't feel anxious, and I wasn't overthinking or worrying or self-destructing. The eating disorders, the body dysmorphia, the anxiety, the depression, all of this was all linked with all of this same pattern. And I'm walking up the street, just a normal day, and I was like looking at the sky, and I was like, oh my God, the sky is so blue. It's so blue. I've never seen it. I've never noticed how blue. It's such a beautiful color. And the birds, and I was like, oh my God, the birds. And it was like this crazy, like my whole body was tingling. I was just like smiling from ear to ear. I felt like dancing down the street and like singing at everyone. And it's just, I realized that I could feel that. That's how I used to feel in these highs. That was what I was searching. And it's just been there all along inside of me. I was just blocked because I was so disconnected to my body and so disconnected to myself and so afraid to actually just be in me. And I remember around that time listening to a talk from Eckhart Tolle, who was talking about the power of now. And he was doing an audience talk and in an auditorium, and it was a recorded one. And he was talking about, that once we understand that the only thing that we have is now, and we're able to be present, and we're able to be embodied, and we're able to really purely enjoy life without the fear of the future or the depression of the past. But he raised a question that he believes that most people, in order to access that, have to go to a certain place of darkness or a certain place of pain or a certain place of destruction first. And he asked the audience to raise their hand of who had done that, and every single person in the audience had. So every single person that understood this concept, every single person that was there because they knew what he was talking about, had taken that journey, which is why I say I'm grateful for my addiction. And I think that something that fuels me in my journey and what I'm doing is I want to try and enable people to have that without having to go to that dark place. Like, do we have to have that? Yes, I'm grateful for mine, but I also wouldn't wish everybody to have 20 years of suffering just to be able to have this embodied and spiritual life. That was kind of short.
Yeah, and it's super touching. I resonate with so many of the layers that you touched on. Myself, I went through like Codependence Anonymous, and like before that, I stepped into like Sex Addicts Anonymous, and just realizing it has nothing to do with like any coping mechanism. It has really just to do with that level of, am I connected or am I disconnected? And really that, yeah, I mean, what you described with walking down the street and just seeing the blue sky and feeling it. So I notice that a lot when I'm cycling, actually. I feel for me, cycling is that sort of like almost this like alchemizing practice at the moment, where I just had it yesterday and the day before, where it's like I'm going from like being so fucking pissed off with life to then having the most beautiful encounters with like random strangers, and it's like, wow. It's the more sort of bandwidth of up and down I allow myself to feel. More like,
and I think
this mystical, just like one moment to the next, gifting,
And I think what you said there is really important and something that's really key. It's not, and something that I really like to try and remind and push forward is that, like, if you're not recovered or fixed or healed, it's not like you do the work. I mean, my friend says this lovely thing where she's like, the self-development and self-awareness journey ends at death, darling. Which I always think is lovely. But although I don't think it does, because she's the kind of person, she'd come back and haunt me after she'd gone and still make me do stuff. But the point you made about this, the bandwidth and the, you could be like, I'm so pissed off at the world, and then I'm on my bike and I'm in love with nature again. This is another thing that one of my beautiful friends said to me a few years ago, and it resonated so much that I use it all the time, is this idea of contrast. That we need contrast in order to be able to experience. And I guess that this whole idea, this whole episode is about that, to have the darkness first, and able to see the brightness of the light, day and night, yin and yang, black and white. We can't have those moments where you really enjoy it, when life feels amazing and everything feels great. Like, would you really have that if everything was like that all day long, every day? So even when you've been through this, and we are in these, so grateful to be in such a, like, sometimes I'm like, is this really my life? Like, is this, I really do have so much gratitude. But then there are days where I still feel anxious or pissed off, or, those things, we don't change. Like, I remember calling my sponsor about 6 months into the program. And there's a part where, as you probably know, you go through your character defects and you work on the ones. And I really misunderstood it in the beginning, and I thought that I had to remove them completely. So, I was never allowed to be angry or resentful or fearful ever again. And I called her and I was like, oh my God, I'm failing the program. And she's like, why? And I was like, well, because I had an altercation with this photographer, and I didn't like what he said, and I got really angry, and I was really, really angry, and I'm so disappointed in myself. And she was like, you're still a human. Like, we're not asking you to not be human. You're still going to feel anger. That's okay. It's what you do with that now. She said, what did you do with it? I said, well, I sat with it for 10 minutes and I felt it. And I realized that it was actually a projection of my own insecurity and nothing to do with anything he'd said. So I didn't respond to him. And then I did some journaling. She was like, great. So no problem, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I totally recognize that in myself as well. And it's quite interesting. This, I feel, a journey towards actually connecting more with the self. And I'm noticing for me, there's actually a lot of energy sort of like in the solar plexus area. And really the energy of sort of like manifestation. And that's also where I feel for me, this whole addiction piece, it's sort of I feel it comes out as a effect of not being courageous to step forward in what I want. But it's like, oh, I'm too afraid to really say what I want. So I sort of like put this to the side and rather take sort of like a thing that's expected of me. But my grandpa always said, water has a pointy head. And so it's this thing that I never understood until a few years ago. And it's like, the energy will always come out. And if it's not coming out in a way that's constructive, productive, and basically making something positive, it will come out in some sort of like perverted, contorted way that will destroy shit. And so it's like, man, if I want something, I just need to own it. And yeah, it may hurt some people's feelings in the short run, or may sort of make somebody feel disappointed in me or whatever. But it's ultimately the only path is integrity in that sense. And I feel that for me has been where, yeah, the growth really comes from that previously addictive behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I have learned through the recovery is that as long as I lead with love and truth, I can't really go wrong. It, like you said, it may hurt somebody, but it's not hurtful if you're leading with love and you're being authentic and you're saying your truth. No, it's something that I practice in my relationships. It's something that is imperative with ENM and polyamory, truth and communication and honesty. And it's interesting that you said about this idea of kind of like not speaking your truth, I guess, or kind of repressing your authenticity, but it will find these ways to kind of filter out, but it'll probably be in pathways that you're maybe not in control of, or are not actually the healthiest ways, or maybe like, and I think there's a real correlation there to how I see the BDSM community and how that really helped me and actually as well, when you were talking, I hadn't really made this correlation, but I really resonated with that point, because when I think about when I really made the changes and started moving away from my addiction was when I left my partner that I'd been with for several years. And as much as he was a kind person, I was so not being myself, and I didn't want to be there. I didn't want that environment. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have kids. I didn't want to be living where I was living. I was in a job that I hated. I was dulling myself down to be this person that I thought I had to be in order to fit in. And the kind of the path to the recovery actually started with me leaving him, and then leaving that house, and then moving to London and changing my job and changing the people around me and being able to actually start to express who I am. And then you don't need that outlet. You don't need it to come out in those other ways, because you're creating space around you to be able to have those experiences that I guess are what you're really craving underneath. I really like that.
Yeah, and I feel it connects to this piece that you said earlier of like seeking presence and embodiment. That it's, if and I notice it in myself when I'm, for example, cycling in heavy traffic. That is when I'm so fucking embodied, because like every action will basically be a sort of like a life and death decision. And it's like, man, there is no room to like dilly-dally and like think about like resentment or like future plans. It's like, okay, what is happening right now? Like, where's the gap? And it's interesting because when you speak about kind of this whole your movement into the BDSM space, and yeah, really connecting with that creative life force in a way. I'd be curious to hear more on like how your movement towards the BDSM space really helped you to like express more of who you are and connect more deeply and be more present.
I mean, interestingly, like what you just said there about cycling, and how you feel like, I mean, it's not life or death, but I am energetically responsible for this other human being, for this other person's emotions and energy and experience. And I think that the level of like presence that I have to have in order to do that, and the level of connection that I feel when exchanging sexual energy with another person, the combination of that means that exactly like that, whenever I'm in those spaces, it's like I'm in this vortex. You know, there's nothing else outside of where I am apart from exactly what's happening. There's no way my mind could ever wander. And in the past, and that's not about it being a sexual interaction, because I know that in the past, when I was having unconscious sex, I get that sounds bad, like not connected consciously. That sounded really bad. You know what I mean? I could easily be involved in some kind of sexual activity, me thinking about what I was going to make for my dinner later, because I wasn't actually embodying doing it. It was another, I guess, like you were saying, it was this desire that was in me that I wasn't allowing to come out. So it was going off and being like, we'll just go and have sex with loads of people because that will probably satisfy this thing. And it was nothing about that. And I think that also the correlation between me understanding and living a more spiritual life and actually feeling that connection to other people's energies and really believing in it, because I always think I knew there was something there, but I was a bit of a skeptic. That actually really helped to fuel the benefits that I get and the connection that I get from the BDSM environment. It's just such a safe space. Obviously, if you are being safe and you are working and you are connecting with the right people, like anything, to explore all of these elements of ourselves that are probably, well, definitely are things that in the past I would have not wanted to share with anyone. You know, if I had said I would have been utterly, and shame, it's that shame thing again. You know, I would have had so much shame in being like, I want to be worshipped. I want people to tell me that I am the most important and most beautiful person in the world. And I want them to show me that. And then I want to whip them. There's no way I would have been able to say, like, there's no way. I just wouldn't have been able to do that, because I would have felt so much like embarrassment and shame. And now I have these group of friends where I can call them and I can be like, oh my God, just did the most amazing session. You know, I got to do this and that, and it was so incredible. And I felt so embodied. And then they're all so supportive of it. And they're like, oh, what happened then? And then what? And that, having that space, yeah, I don't need to go and have unhealthy practices anymore in any other spaces.
It's just so fun, Ellie. I feel you always bring so much joy to me when you speak about this. Because I feel it's really important, like what you highlight, this whole piece around like connection. And I mean, the opposite of addiction is connection. But it's not just the connection with others. Because what I notice in sort of the recovery community, it's very much that focus on sort of like the community. And I mean, obviously, it's good to have other people that basically struggle and, you know, grow through the same thing as you do, because it makes you feel less of a weirdo. And it's like, okay, yeah, other people have the same issues, and then you can support one another. But I feel what I noticed for myself is really this just deeper and deeper connection with myself, and with like the different aspects, the different, you know, desires and personalities that basically I'm made up of as well. And I feel particular sort of the intimacy space is where, at least for me, most of sort of like the really like just like painful sort of wounds exist. And so I feel what you're saying there with that, really being in the deep space of like intimacy and telling people to worship you and then whip them, it's so fun. It sounds like this amazing play that you're into.
I think what's when you were talking about before about this idea of, you know, not expressing what you truly, your authentic self, and actually something interesting that came up for me quite early on and still comes up for me over and over again with my therapist, is that the first time that I was asked, but what do you truly desire? I burst into tears because I realized I had absolutely no idea. I'd spent my entire life up to that point only thinking about pleasing others, because that was how I believed that I got my pleasure and validation. So that's another thing for me, particularly being in the dominant space in the BDSM community, is that I decide what I want. I mean, it's a complex thing because I'm pro as well. Obviously, people come to me and say, I would like to do these things, which does happen. But I tend to work with people that are looking for exploration, so that then I can be like, I want to try this. So we're going to do this today. And I want you to do this for me. And even when I first started doing that, I thought I was just going to give people what they wanted. And then I was fortunate that one of my very first clients said to me, no, I want you to tell me what you desire from me. I was like, oh. I was like, I never know the answer to that question, but it's been such an incredible journey, and I'm still on it. I still don't entirely know. And I guess, yeah, no, I would say I don't know if I ever will, but I think no, I will. But I think it's like, 32 years of not connecting to like what I actually desire. I think I figured out a lot of who I am and a lot of what I like to express and a lot of like where I want to be and what I want to be doing. But I think, as you said, with the intimacy for you, that's where some of the deepest wounds are. I think for me, interestingly, it's actually similar in the sense of it being sex and desire. And the BDSM world is helping me to heal that and helping me to figure that out. But it's like layers and layers and layers, like thick papier-mâché stuff from 30 years worth of things. But again, wouldn't even have the knowledge that needed to be accessed without addiction and without recovery. And I think that's the key, is the self-awareness. I had no idea that I obviously knew I wasn't happy. I was incredibly unhappy, but I had no idea about all of this stuff that was possible from inside of me. And I think that's what the recovery brings. And yeah, it's a lifelong journey, right? We're not like, unfortunately, you don't just do it for 2 years and then everything's great and then you just go off and dance in the woods and life's like that. That'd be great though.
It's definitely, I feel this, I mean, in the recovery space, it's always this like the peeling of the onion. And I mean, I look at really like deeper and deeper and deeper layers of sort of purpose that come through. And I mean, I see it in all areas of my life. Like whether it's in a business context where it's like, yesterday I thought this was, today it's more refined. And so, I mean, as you said earlier, the personal development or development in general just never ends. And as we continue to grow, I feel that is, that drives sort of this curiosity. And I want to link this back to what you said earlier as well, that we're really, all of us are addicted to something, and some things are just societally acceptable and others are not. And it's interesting because when you listen to like Stephen Kotler, for example, who does a lot of work around flow and flow states and all that. I mean, when you hear about the chemicals that your body creates when it becomes present, it's, you know, if you don't get like the dopamine and the norepinephrine and all these great chemicals from the inside, then it's very exciting to take these things like externally, which could be, you know, cocaine and speed and like all that jazz. And so I find there's some real fascinating insight around that. Our bodies seem to be made to experience these autotelic states, which is like a scientific word, you know, basically addictive states. Because when we're like, when we're filled with these chemicals, we feel alive, you know? And there's that, this presence, this embodiment. And I'd be curious, like for everyone who's listening, like because I found a lot of insight basically through wearable tech and, you know, that kind of like self-insight, why is my nervous system craving X, Y, and Z? And then realizing, cool, it actually balances my nervous system out. But I'm curious to hear what you have really found on your journey to work for you to become more present, become more embodied. You said sitting with the emotions, but then what other things are you engaging with?
Yeah, I think what you said there is really key, that our body craves these feelings, right? The dopamine, the joy, but we have it naturally. But what's happened is we've built a society and a culture that blocks us from actually accessing that naturally. So now we're looking for it in other spaces, because we can't just all sit around all day being in our bodies and feeling delicious, because we've got to go and be part of capitalism, unfortunately. So then we find it in a glass of wine, or we find it in a chocolate bar, or we find it in sex, or we find it in driving fast cars, or we find it in overworking, or we find it in overeating, or there's so many different things. I mean, work, to me, actually, being addicted to work is one of the least spoke about, but the most dangerous, and the most, like, everyone. I mean, I did that for a while as well, on top of being addicted to several other things, because I like to collect things. I don't like to just have one. I have a few of them. But yes, to bring it back to your actual question, I have found that what I have to do is switch up what the things are, because I am ADHD and a manifestor generator, and just generally know that I have a tendency to get very bored by things and lose interest very quickly. I found that the key is switching them up. So one week it might be, okay, I'm going to do a specific type of meditation this week. I've just discovered this new visualization one that I really like. Then it'll be like, okay, I'm going to do some movement practice. So the embodiment coaching stuff I do, we do a lot of stuff around primal feminine flow, which is essentially dropping into the body and moving in whatever way your body wants to move. Then it might be like, okay, this week I'm going to cook home cooked meals every night, because cooking from scratch makes me feel so incredibly embodied. And the color of food, like, it just has some effect on my brain, like, especially for some really weird reason, butternut squash. Whenever I cook with butternut squash, I'm so amazed by the color of it that I'm like, wow. Yeah, that's like one of those moments, like the walking down the street moments, where I just look at it and I'm like, this is a natural cut. Like, look at this. Like, nature made this. This is so amazing. But if I did that every day, that wouldn't work for me. It would, I guess it's kind of like, I don't know what it is. I need the variety. So yeah, I think I switch things up. If I lived nearer to the sea, I would go in the sea, probably, or look at the sea every day. Because that's something, whenever I do that, it's just like I'm straight in my body immediately. And I have this sense of, like, I used to do it actually even before I got into recovery and before I discovered all this stuff. It was one thing that I could do, and it would take me out of my anxiety and take me into my body, because I would just see the vastness of the ocean and be like, wow, I'm just a teeny tiny little person in this massive, massive world. And all of a sudden, something that Sandra said to me at work yesterday really doesn't seem like such a big deal now that I'm looking at this huge ocean. So yeah, I think variety, and it basically all centers around nature and connection to self, and water is pretty much it on a varied cycle. So Ellie's little brain doesn't get too bored.
It's so funny that you say that. Because I mean, yeah, novelty. I mean, when you look at flow science, basically the societally acceptable part of, like, being addicted to something, it's exactly that. It's like novelty is such a flow trigger. And it's interesting what you say with nature and the sea as well. That's something that makes me super present as well. So I started sailing this year. And even this morning, just cycling through the woods, because I feel nature itself is, like, continuously changing, and there's always something different, and there is that just, like, inbuilt novelty in some way. It's fascinating. And as we're coming kind of towards the end, I really want to tap into this last piece around kind of like addiction, sort of like being a signpost towards, like, a deeply fulfilling and meaningful life. And I mean, you spoke a lot about gambling earlier. For me, it was certainly more in the sex and porn space. And I mean, for me, what I noticed is, like, man, I just want to have more of these like wild experiences embodied rather than just being an academic and studying shit in the head, instead of actually just physically experiencing it, you know? So I'm curious to hear, like, how are you treating your addictions as these sort of guideposts to, yeah, feeling more, living more of what you actually want rather than what is expected in some way?
I think it probably comes down to the idea of contrast again, you know, and the first time I experienced the same things that I would have done when I was gambling, when I was in addiction, but doing them not in addiction and present and embodied, is the driver to that is that point of like, yeah, I think it's I remember kind of being like, I'm trying to think of an example from the beginning. I think that, I guess even just like having dinner out with friends, like I didn't used to smile a lot, and I remember looking at other people smiling and being like, why are they so happy? Like, how are they just sat there being so happy? And I think that time I remember just looking around at all of the faces of my friends, and like the food I was eating was so amazing, and like even just the noise. I never noticed like how much I enjoy the noise of a restaurant. Like everybody, just loads of people connecting and talking, and like just all of this kind of like vibration of connection in the room. And I'd never been present enough to be able to actually notice all of these things and take them all in and have that experience. And I think each time I had those little experiences of contrast, and similar things happened to me in sexual connection with people when I actually had it embodied for the first time and actually felt like I was connected with that person, like energetically and spiritually and emotionally as well as physically. And each one of those contrasts builds to just drive you continued on this journey.
It's
I
interesting.
feel like you froze.
No, a friend of mine, when he speaks about this, he talks about like addiction being sort of this like checking out from the moment while, yeah, really being present is like leaning in and being there. So it's an interesting question, specifically when you speak about kind of the sexual practice and what's really for you the kind of the quality of being in an addicted space versus being in it in a really healthy space?
From as it is sexual practice.
Yeah.
I mean, I was completely disconnected from my own body and my own sexual experience and my own sexuality and sensuality the whole time I was in addiction. Like, I experienced very occasionally physical pleasure and gratification, but I never experienced emotional or energetic or like in the way that, I mean, the idea when I discovered that you can actually move and control sexual energy around your body was like this mind-blowing, like literally a mind-blowing experience. And even just to have like, just to completely reframe how I viewed intimacy and sex and sexual interactions with people. And I used to just believe that I had this really high sex drive and just, you know, I used to be nicknamed Samantha, which is like, you know, the character from Sex and the City that has all the sex, because I would just have one night stands all the time. But I actually wasn't really enjoying any of it. And it was similar to what you said before. It was like this, just, there was a desire underneath that wasn't being met. So it was coming out in this way. But I was just going through the motions is the only way I could describe it. And not actually thinking I was going to feel this thing from it and never feeling this thing. So then trying again and again and again and seeking this thing that just wasn't coming. And then actually being embodied and having that experience and being like, oh, it's not about quantity at all. And it's not about how much, it's about how deep is the connection and how much can I experience, have this as a fully shared experience with this other person, whether that is sex with a partner, whether that is BDSM play, whether that is something that doesn't involve any actual sexual activity, but it's just a transference of sexual energy, it's just monumentally different, like from here to here in the experience, like completely. And I still feel like I'm only just like a little bit up the hill. Like there's so much more to open and discover within it.
It's really interesting when you speak. What comes up for me is sort of like being in an environment that is safe versus being in an environment that's unsafe. And sort of in the safe environment, you can obviously open yourself more. So I'd be curious to explore this maybe for a few more moments of like, to what degree have you been able to create more of these safe spaces, and how do you do it so that you feel that you can actually, become more present in them?
I mean, I think the key thing there when you said about these safe spaces is actually that is actually about being safe in my own body and feeling safe within myself was the first thing, because I didn't feel safe in my own body because I didn't really fully understand it, physically and energetically and emotionally, actually. And also I hadn't actually processed a lot of traumas. I hadn't gone through a lot of stuff that needed to be released and needed to be healed. So I think it's all of the work, all of the so many layers of like working through stuff in therapy, working through stuff with my sponsor, working through stuff. I do a lot of stuff with breath work and with movement. Interesting that you mentioned your solar plexus earlier, because that's the point where I always access in breath work, and that's the point where I always get the biggest release from. Whatever it is, it always seems to come from there. Physically, anyway, is where it embodies. And exploration, allowing myself to be honest with myself and with those around me, having these difficult conversations with partners, where I recently had it with my partner where I was like, I have to follow my exploration with women. I don't really resonate as being bisexual. I resonate as being queer, and by not having female sexual connection in my life, I don't feel complete. So opening it up so that I can go and do that and have this, and I would never have had the bravery to be able to do these things. And I think it's about cultivating safety within yourself, cultivating safety within your partners, if you have partners, and cultivating safety within the actual environment and the people that you're connecting with. And safety looks different to everybody. And I guess that then relates back to an understanding of yourself, an understanding of your body, understanding of what makes you feel safe, and then having the consciousness and the confidence and the bravery to be able to ask for that and create it, which when you're disconnected will never happen, because you don't even know what it is in the first place to even begin to ask for it.
It's so interesting that the safety within the self first. And I feel that for me, I've done a lot of work with like heart rate variability technology to actually understand my nervous system better in like different states and different experiences I have in life. And that's been really, really fascinating to actually explore more and more, like, what does my nervous system do? Do I feel stress? Do I feel in a sense of relaxation? And then doing more of the areas that balance me and less of the areas that kind of keep me rigid and stuck in more sort of like a fear-based way of being.
Yeah, and I think that understanding, even like understanding what the nervous system feels like, what is this that I'm feeling? Even that now, I'm listening and I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Of course, I know what that feels like in my body. I know what that feels like in my body. But I think I'm taking that for granted maybe now, actually, that I didn't used to know what fear felt like, or what the difference between, like, one of the first things I think I learned was the difference or similarity actually between the feeling of excitement and the feeling of fear and how they embody. And so I guess your own knowledge of your own nervous system is one of the keys to accessing your own safety within your body.
Yeah, it is definitely the ability to also tune the nervous system. And I mean, that's where we come back to breath work, what you said earlier as well, where how we breathe is really the only conscious way that we can actually tune our nervous system. And I mean, it's something that I notice with myself so often, that I tend to breathe in a quite shallow pattern. And then my whole system gets worked up into stress. And then it's like, okay, Toby, just step away, breathe a little bit differently, and boom, the magic happens. And I mean, it's something that like throughout November, December, we're yeah, creating this program to basically test like how much does actually breathwork sort of play a role in that whole like addiction recovery and that nervous system tuning, and yeah, allowing that insight into, you know, just knowing the self, feeling safe in the self, and having the tools really to create that level of safety, so that really the addictive behaviors can be channeled into something that's like societally meaningful, and really creates happiness for yourself and happiness for the people around you, rather than pain and sadness, really.
Absolutely. And I guess when you think about breath work, you know, whether you're doing that as an extensive 2 hour long practice, or whether it is just literally part of meditation, or reminding yourself, hey, I need to breathe, you know, like you said, like the shallow breathing is something that, you know, is super common in everyone, and is actually really common in women, especially because of the whole, we're taught it to hold our stomachs in, because that's the vision that we should look like. I have a whole theory about that, but that's just a whole other thing. But all of that comes back to connection to yourself. So connection to your breath is just intrinsically connected to connection with yourself, right?
Absolutely.
I remember the very first time doing any kind of breath work was in a meditation, and it was literally just really deep belly breathing. That was all it was for like about 3 minutes, and I wept, like, and I was like, what is going on? Where is this coming from? Like, I wasn't consciously, logically thinking that I was sad about anything, or had any emotion, but that must have been one of the first moments that I'd actually fully dropped into my body, probably since I was a child. So it just released all of this stuff and it was utterly terrifying at that point in time, because I had no idea what was going on. But as I went on, I understood. And again, like you said, I have to check in. I was really grateful when somebody brings it up as well, because I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm not breathing properly, actually. Like, just check in throughout the day to remind myself to breathe.
Yeah, and it seems like such a fundamental thing. It's I mean, even there, you know, like changing things up again. And I notice when I do computer work, also like the vision, you know, narrows down, and basically when the vision focuses on a point, then your body gets into a state of stress. And for me, I noticed my like most addictive periods were at times in my life when it was like, man, being on the computer basically from morning till evening, doing lots of uni work and feeling really pressured to actually get this degree. And it's like, now looking back, it's like, oh, thank you, nervous system, for actually finding some pathway for me to kind of be more balanced, even though at the time it did create a level of like suffering. But then when I was using my HRV tag, I realized like, wow, just looking at the data, I felt so much gratitude. I was like, thank you, buddy. You've known all along what I needed in these moments when I got stressed. And that just level of insight and gratitude helped me to release like all the shame and the guilt, and be like, yeah, cool, I found a modality, man, and it worked. And now I know that I can find other modalities that do the same thing. So instead of watching porn, I can just do breath work. And I can do it in a meeting room, I can do it anywhere, and it will actually inspire the people around me to become more embodied as well. So it has this like ripple out effect that's positive, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that understanding of connecting to that understanding of why. And I think that's the importance. That's the important thing with the addiction and the recovery journey, is like, once you remove, you get rid of the fear and the resentment and the shame, and you remove and you make your amendments so that you can kind of take that away, and then you can figure out the why, and then you can replace it. Essentially, that's what we're doing, because this theory, which I completely resonate and agree with, that the reason why so many of us seek these spaces in addiction is because our bodies are desiring this state. So there's nothing wrong with still desiring to be in that state. It's just about finding a healthy and kind and safe way to be in that state.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. I feel that really sums up what we've explored today. If you want to share anything, Ellie, I mean, I put all your links in the bio, but if you have any things that you want to invite people to, please, let's do this.
Yeah, thank you. So I have, so in my business in Authentique, which is, you know, all about getting women into their body and connecting to their sensuality and their sexual expression, and removing all of the shame and the fear and the guilt and all of that crap. I have an event on the 20th of November, which is a photo shoot event, which uses a lot of breath work and movement and embodiment. And next year, in August, I'll be running my first retreat, which is
amazing,
pretty exciting. So yeah, that's all on my website.
Yeah, super fun. And again, thank you so much for being here and like sharing so authentically and vulnerably your quest and the insights that you've taken from it. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining in and being present. If there's any things that come up for you, always reach out. If you're interested in exploring that alpha program with the wearable tech, there's a link under the video. And otherwise, much love, and until next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.